can hardly contain my gasps of wonder and amazement. Ooh.
They were Britain's biggest television stars, watched by millions, adored by audiences, and earning fortunes that seemed impossible to lose. So how did so many end up broke, forgotten, and relying on charity just to survive? Today we're counting down 12 British TV legends whose lives took shocking turns, from Sid James, who gambled away a fortune, and Tommy Cooper, whose career was devastated by crushing tax debts, to Freddie Starr, who lost everything after a £1 million legal battle. But nothing compares to number one, a Hollywood and British TV icon who went from luxury homes and international fame to living in a damp, empty flat with no furniture, surviving only because his famous friends organized a benefit concert to pay his bills. Stay until the end, because these true stories prove that fame doesn't always end in fortune. Number 12, Bella Emberg. Let's start with someone many younger viewers might not immediately recognize, but if you grew up in Britain during the 1980s, the name Bella Emberg was absolutely synonymous with comedy excellence. She was a staple of British television during its most vibrant era, best known for playing the character Woman alongside comedian Russ Abbott on his massively popular sketch show, a program that pulled in millions of viewers every single week. Bella Emberg was a household face. She appeared on prime-time television regularly. She was recognized on the street. She had achieved that pinnacle of entertainment that most performers spend their entire careers chasing: genuine, undeniable fame. But here's the critical distinction that this entire list illustrates. Being famous and being financially secure are two entirely different propositions. Bella Emberg's career, despite its visibility, was built on a foundation of complete inconsistency. She would land a substantial role in a high-profile comedy program. The work would be intense, the exposure enormous, the recognition guaranteed. Then, without warning, the work would evaporate. Months would pass without employment. Producers loved her in comedy. They adored her comedic timing and her ability to extract laughs from character work. But the dramatic roles, the parts that paid significantly more money, the roles that offered longer-term contracts and better compensation, those opportunities were rarely, if ever, offered to her. She had become trapped by the very characters that had made her famous. This phenomenon, known as typecasting, was devastating for actors of her era, particularly for character actors in comedy. In her later years, Bella Emberg spoke with remarkable openness about her financial struggles. She didn't hide behind pretense or false pride. She admitted publicly to surviving on minimal state benefits. She discussed her constant worry about paying rent. The woman who had made an entire nation laugh every week was quietly struggling behind closed doors, worried about the most basic necessities of life. When Bella Emberg passed away in 2018, her estate reflected decades of financial precarity. Her story serves as a stark reminder that fame, no matter how visible or consistent it might appear from the audience's perspective, does not come with a savings account or financial security. It comes with recognition. It comes with love from audiences. It does not necessarily come with money that lasts beyond the filming dates. Number 11, Richard Beckinsale. Richard Beckinsale was on the verge of becoming one of the most significant stars British television had ever produced. This wasn't speculation or hype. By the mid-1970s, he had already demonstrated remarkable range and natural charm across multiple programs. In the 1970s, he starred as the lovable, endearing character Lenny Godber in Porridge, which stands as one of the most celebrated sitcoms in BBC history. The show was critically acclaimed. It was beloved by audiences. It ran successfully for multiple series. Critics recognized in Beckinsale a genuine natural talent. He then pivoted to a different character in a different program, the charming Alan Moore in Rising Damp. Both shows were substantial television successes. Both pulled in significant viewing figures. Richard Beckinsale became beloved by audiences across the country. Entertainment industry observers were already predicting that he would transition into film, into more dramatic roles, into the kind of career that generated genuine long-term wealth. But here is where this story becomes genuinely heartbreaking. And it's important to understand that this is not a story of financial mismanagement or reckless behavior. This is a story of time stolen. Richard Beckinsale never got the opportunity to enjoy the rewards of that success. In March of 1979, at precisely the moment when his career was accelerating exponentially, he passed away suddenly, an undetected heart condition. He was 31 years old. 31. His career, despite its promise, had barely begun in terms of building actual financial infrastructure. He hadn't had sufficient time to accumulate savings. He hadn't invested in property that might appreciate. He had not established the kind of long-term financial security that typically takes years of sustained high earnings to develop. For young actors in that era, residual payments and repeat fees were minimal or non-existent compared to modern standards. His death was so sudden and so early that his young family, including his daughter Kate Beckinsale, who was just 5 years old at the time, were left in immediate financial difficulty. His estate was almost entirely empty. The substantial fortune that should have inevitably followed from years of residual payments, from the constant repeating of those successful shows, from the growing stardom that would have surely followed, none of that ever materialized. This is not a cautionary tale about wasted money or poor decision-making. It is a story of potential unfulfilled, of a trajectory interrupted, and of an entire family left without the financial safety net they would have almost certainly enjoyed had circumstances been different. Number 10. Jack Hargreaves. Jack Hargreaves is perhaps less well known to younger audiences, but to an entire generation of British children and families, he was something much more significant than simply a television presenter. He was a warm, avuncular figure. He appeared on screen with a pipe. He had a gentle demeanor. He spoke about countryside life, about fishing, about the natural world, about rural traditions, with genuine enthusiasm and deep knowledge. He presented Out of Town on Southern television for years, a quiet, calming program that became a staple of television schedules, a show that families would gather around. He also appeared regularly on beloved children's programs, How and others. Millions of British people trusted him. They invited him into their homes week after week. To many viewers, he felt like a wise grandfather figure who appeared on the television screen with perfect consistency, teaching them about the world, about nature, about the countryside. This is crucial context for what happened next. In 1981, Southern Television lost its ITFO broadcast franchise. This wasn't a gradual decline. This wasn't a slow phase out. This was sudden and absolute. The franchise simply ended. The television company ceased operations in that region. Just like that, it was gone. And with it, Jack Hargreaves' television income vanished almost overnight. In today's world, a television presenter with his level of fame, his years of consistent employment, his recognizable presence, he would have agents, formal contracts, pension arrangements, guaranteed repeat fees, residuals written into agreements, legal protections. None of that existed in the same way during the early 1980s. The television industry operated differently. Contract protections were minimal. There was no safety net, no fallback, no protection when a franchise ended. Jack Hargreaves, who had built an entire career on his presence and reliability, found himself suddenly without work and without the financial infrastructure to sustain his life. He retreated to the countryside he loved and had spent decades celebrating on television. But he did so without the financial comfort he had earned. He spent his retirement years in a sparse, financially difficult situation. Every expense became a concern. Every bill represented a genuine worry. He died in 1994 at the age of 80, largely forgotten by the television industry that had once depended on his presence, his knowledge, and his warmth. His story demonstrates something that's critical to understand. Television can celebrate someone one moment and completely discard them the next. Fame and employment are temporary. The infrastructure that should protect long-term livelihoods simply wasn't in place. Number 9. Wilfrid Brambell. If you have ever watched Steptoe and Son, you know Wilfrid Brambell intimately. Even if you're not entirely sure of his name, he played Albert Steptoe, the dirty, scheming, cantankerous old rag and bone man who made life absolutely miserable for his son Harold. The role was perfect. The writing was brilliant. The entire program stands as one of the greatest sitcoms ever made in British television history. Even today, decades and decades later, people still quote the show. They still watch it. They still find it genuinely funny. Wilfrid Brambell's performance was nothing short of extraordinary. He brought Albert to vivid life with an energy and sharpness that was genuinely special. He created a fully realized character with depth and comedic precision, The show ran throughout the 1960s and 1970s and pulled in enormous viewing figures. Week after week, millions of British people watched Wilfrid Brambell inhabit this role. He became a true television star. But here is where the brutal economic reality intervenes. British television actors during the 1960s operated under a compensation structure that seems almost incomprehensible to modern performers. They were paid a flat fee per episode. That was the entire compensation. No royalties, no residual payments, no back-end arrangements. If they filmed an episode, they received a set payment. That was it. Every single time Steptoe and Son was repeated, and it was repeated constantly, becoming one of the most repeated programs in BBC history, Wilfrid Brambell received absolutely nothing. Nothing. The BBC benefited enormously. The audience numbers justified broadcast after broadcast. Audiences loved the show. Brambell, the man whose talent and presence made the program work, received nothing for those subsequent broadcasts. On top of this financial reality, Brambell faced severe tax debts. He struggled intensely with typecasting. After Steptoe and Son concluded, producers and casting directors couldn't envision him in any other role. He received offers almost exclusively for grumpy old men characters. Those roles, while potentially available, were few and far between. The career that had made him famous had trapped him in a very specific box. He spent his final years in a small flat with very little money remaining to his name. By the end, his financial situation was dire. He died in 1985. It is genuinely difficult to reconcile his poverty with the immense, measurable joy his work brought to millions and millions of people over decades. Number 8. Sid James. Sid James is one of the most recognizable faces in British entertainment history. His cheeky laugh became iconic. His twinkling eyes and his effortless timing made him the absolute heart of the legendary Carry On film series. He appeared in more Carry On films than almost any other actor in the entire franchise. He became synonymous with the series. He was also the lead in the popular It V sitcom Bless This House, which pulled in huge audiences throughout the early 1970s. By almost any objective measure, Sid James should have died a wealthy man. His work was constant, he was in demand, he was a genuine star. The financial rewards should have matched his fame. But Sid James had a devastating addiction that ultimately consumed everything he earned, gambling, specifically and intensely on horse racing. This wasn't casual betting. This wasn't the kind of occasional flutter that many people might indulge in. People who worked with him reported disturbing patterns. He would receive his pay packet substantial money for successful work and head directly to the bookmakers. He would lose entire weeks of wages before he even left the studio. He would receive compensation for a week of filming and lose it all in an afternoon at the betting shop. This continued for decades. Film after film, show after show. The money came in regularly. It immediately went back out. His gambling debts accumulated quietly beneath the surface of his very public success. To audiences, he was thriving. To himself, he was in constant financial freefall. When Sid James died on stage during a theatre performance in Sunderland in April of 1976, collapsing mid-performance in front of a live audience, his estate was found to contain practically nothing. A career that had spanned decades. Countless films, regular television appearances, enormous amounts of work and visibility had left behind almost no financial legacy. His story became one of the most sobering cautionary tales in British entertainment history, illustrating how even consistently high income can be completely obliterated by untreated addiction. If these stories are making you think, if you're genuinely surprised by what we're uncovering about the financial lives of British television's biggest stars, hit that like button right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. These stories deserve to be told, and we're only halfway through. We've got 6 more British legends to cover, and the remaining stories get progressively darker. Number 7, John Mesurier. John Mesurier is one of those actors whose face and voice feel like they belong to a different, more gentle era of British television. An era of politeness and understated humour. As Sergeant Arthur Wilson in Dad's Army, he was the perfect counterpoint to Arthur Lowe's pompous Captain Mainwaring. Mesurier's performance was understated, polite, quietly confused, and absolutely hilarious. His timing was impeccable. His character was beloved. Dad's Army is still broadcast to this day. It remains one of the BBC's most repeated programs ever created. Decades after its original broadcast, it's still finding new audiences. It's still generating viewing figures. And yet, John Mesurier spent his later years in constant financial worry. The issue again returns to the fundamental problem of British television contracts during that era. The equity union contracts that governed television work established repeat fee structures that were almost insulting by modern standards. Under those agreements, repeat fees were negligible, minimal amounts of money, essentially pennies per repeat broadcast. Every single time Dad's Army was shown again, and it was shown again and again and again, continuously. Consistently, the cast received almost no financial benefit. The BBC profited from the ratings, the audience received entertainment, the actors received virtually nothing. John Mesurier also dealt with serious health problems on top of this financial squeeze. His struggles were compounded. He relied heavily on theatrical charities organizations specifically established to help actors who found themselves in desperate financial situations, who couldn't afford the basics of life. These charities became essential to his survival. He passed away in 1983. It represents a genuine shame that a man who brought so much warmth and laughter to British television, a man who created a character that remained beloved for decades, spent his final years worrying constantly about how to pay his bills. Number 6. Tommy Cooper. Tommy Cooper is one of the most purely funny human beings Britain has ever produced. If you've ever seen even 30 seconds of his act, you understand instantly why he was loved so deeply and so widely. The battered fez, the enormous frame, the magic tricks that went wrong every single time, perfectly choreographed failures that somehow produced genuine laughter. The booming laugh, the presence. He was a genius, not in the overused throwaway sense of the word, but in the genuine, legitimate sense. What he did was extraordinarily difficult. He made it look effortless. He was a giant of British variety television from the 1950s all the way through to the 1980s. He worked constantly. Shows, tours, television specials, theater performances. Tommy Cooper was always working. He was always performing. He was always creating. Here's what makes his financial story so complicated. Tommy Cooper was, by all accounts, a genuinely careful person with money in his personal life. He wasn't known for wild spending or reckless gambling. He wasn't a wasteful man. He didn't have obvious vices that might explain financial ruin. And yet, when his finances were examined, the picture was deeply troubling. Years and years of unpaid tax bills had quietly piled up. The Inland Revenue had a claim on enormous amounts of money he had earned throughout his entire career. Tax obligations that he either couldn't afford to pay or didn't fully address had accumulated into a massive liability. The taxmen had effectively placed claims on the majority of everything he had earned. By the time Tommy Cooper collapsed and died on live television during a performance in April of 1984, one of the most watched, most shocking moments in British broadcasting history, witnessed by millions of viewers, the taxman had effectively swallowed up a huge portion of everything he had earned over his entire career. His estate reflected this reality. The wealth should have been substantial. Instead, it was reduced to a fraction of what it should have been. His story is a stark reminder that earning large amounts of money and keeping large amounts of money are completely different things. Financial planning, proper tax management, and understanding legal obligations are not optional extras. In the days before modern financial planning was standard practice, many entertainers simply didn't have access to proper guidance. Number 5. Charlie Drake. Charlie Drake was a phenomenon in the 1960s and into the 1970s. He was one of the most recognizable and most watched comedians on British television. He was small, energetic, and absolutely fearless. His physical slapstick comedy was extraordinary and innovative. He would throw himself into stunts and pratfalls that regularly put him in genuine danger. He was hospitalized more than once due to serious injuries sustained during filming. The man was completely committed to making people laugh, no matter the personal cost. And at his peak, during the height of his fame and visibility, the financial rewards matched the fame. Charlie Drake wasn't simply earning money. He was accumulating wealth at a significant rate. He owned strings of racehorses. He owned expensive high-end cars. He lived in a large mansion. By the standards of most working people in Britain at the time, he was fabulously wealthy. He lived a lifestyle that reflected his success. But two forces, working together, destroyed everything. And together, they were absolutely unstoppable. The first was a severe gambling addiction. Like Sid James, Charlie Drake had a deep and expensive love for betting, particularly on his own racehorses. His gambling wasn't casual or occasional. It was a serious, consuming addiction that channeled enormous amounts of money directly away from his savings and into betting losses. The second was a massive retrospective tax bill from the Inland Revenue. The taxmen came back, reviewing years of returns, finding underpaid or unpaid taxes. The bill was enormous, far more than he could reasonably pay from his remaining assets. Together, these two forces were unstoppable. The mansion went, the horses went, the cars went. Everything was liquidated. Everything was sold. In his final years, Charlie Drake lived a very simple, modest life. What is remarkable is the philosophical attitude he maintained about it. He reportedly said that he had gambled it all away, but he was at peace with that fact. He was not bitter. He had made choices, he had lived with those consequences, and he accepted the outcome. He passed away in 2006, with very little to his name, but seemingly very little regret either. That kind of grace in the face of such a dramatic fall deserves its own form of respect and acknowledgement. Number 4. Freddie Starr. Freddie Starr was a force of nature. There was genuinely nobody else on British television quite like him. His act was wild, unpredictable, and brilliantly chaotic. He was an impressionist, a comedian, a singer, and a performer who could hold an audience completely in the palm of his hand one moment and totally shock them the next. He could perform anything. He could sustain an enormous audience's attention. He was one of the highest-paid television entertainers in Britain throughout the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. His fame was extraordinary. He was the subject of one of the most famous newspaper headlines in British tabloid history. Whether you believe the story behind that headline or not, just the headline itself made him even more famous. Freddie Starr was genuinely massively famous. He was a household name. So, how did it all fall apart? Through a legal battle that bled him financially dry. Freddie Starr became involved in a costly and very public libel lawsuit. He chose to fight it. He was determined to clear his name. But the legal process is brutally expensive, especially in libel cases. Lawyers' fees accumulate, expert witnesses cost money. Depositions and discovery are expensive. When he ultimately lost the case, he was hit with a legal bill of nearly £1 million. £1 million in legal costs. That is a staggering sum of money by any measure, in any era. To pay this debt, he had to sell his home in the United Kingdom. His residence, the physical property he owned. Gone, he moved to a modest apartment on the coast of Denia in southern Spain. He was living far from the country that had made him famous. Isolated, surviving on a basic state pension. A man who had sold out enormous venues, who had starred in television specials watched by millions, who had earned extraordinary sums of money, was living quietly and humbly in a foreign country because he could not afford to live at home anymore. The fall from international celebrity to exile was swift and complete. He died there in May of 2019. His fall from financial grace is one of the sharpest and most dramatic on this entire list. Number 3. Michael Elphick. Michael Elphick had a rare quality that very few actors possess. He could be funny, warm, and completely convincing on screen all at the same time. When he took the lead role of Jim Boone in the ITV drama Boone in the late 1980s, audiences connected with him immediately and deeply. The chemistry was there, the character was engaging. Boone was a huge success. At its height, the show was pulling in over 11 million viewers every single week. 11 million people tuning in specifically to watch Michael Elphick perform. That is not a small audience. That represents a significant chunk of the entire British population. 1 in 4 people watching television at that hour were watching him. He later joined the cast of EastEnders, the nation's most watched soap opera, taking his profile even higher. He became even more visible, even more recognizable. But behind the scenes, Michael was living with a long and deeply destructive battle with alcoholism. This was not a problem he managed to hide effectively, or one that only emerged occasionally. It was severe, long-term, and it gradually pulled everything apart. It wasn't a public scandal necessarily, but it was a consuming private crisis. The illness derailed his ability to work consistently. Scheduling became difficult. Availability became unreliable. It damaged relationships with colleagues. It burned through his financial resources. Treatment attempts, medical expenses, the general chaos of untreated addiction, all of this consumed money that might have otherwise been saved. By the time Michael Elphick died from a heart attack in September of 2002 at the age of 55, his earnings had been completely consumed by his illness and its consequences. He died in what those close to him described as modest, heavily reduced circumstances. Financial stress was a reality. Security was gone. 55 years old. A television career that had brought joy to millions. Almost nothing left to show for it financially. His story is not one of recklessness or carelessness. It is a story of illness and of a man who never quite got the help he needed in time. It is a tragedy rooted in untreated disease. Number 2, Tony Hancock. To fully understand Tony Hancock's tragedy, you first need to understand exactly how extraordinarily important he was to British culture and British entertainment. Hancock's Half Hour was not just a popular program, it was a cultural landmark. It defined what British radio comedy could be. It demonstrated possibilities that hadn't been explored before. When it moved to television, it defined what British television comedy could be. It showed that comedy could be sophisticated. It could be character-driven. It could work on television as effectively as it worked on radio. Tony Hancock was the biggest comedy star in Britain. Full stop. No argument. No debate. At the absolute peak of his powers in the late 1950s and early 1960s, he was working with two of the greatest comedy writers who have ever lived, Ray Galton and Alan Simpson. Together, they created episodes that are still studied, still analyzed, and still genuinely funny today. The Blood Donor, the Radio Ham. These are not just classic television moments. They are part of British cultural history. They are referenced. They are taught. They represent a pinnacle of the form. But Tony Hancock was consumed by a need for perfectionism that became deeply destructive. He became convinced, increasingly convinced, that the writers were getting more credit than he was. He believed he could do it alone, that the success was his, not theirs, that he was the talent, so he fired Galton and Simpson. It was one of the most catastrophic decisions in British entertainment history. The genius that had produced those brilliant episodes vanished almost immediately without them. The subsequent shows, without Galton and Simpson, struggled. The writing wasn't there. The chemistry wasn't there. Audiences noticed. Critics noticed. The decline was swift. Tony Hancock also battled severe alcoholism throughout his entire life, which became progressively worse and worse as his career declined. The two forces fed each other. As his career suffered, his drinking increased. As his drinking increased, his career suffered more. His personal life fell apart. His marriages failed. His finances crumbled. His television attempts after firing the writers were poorly received, and audiences drifted away. He became isolated. Opportunities vanished. The entertainment industry, which had celebrated him, moved on. By 1968, Tony Hancock found himself alone in a small apartment in Sydney, Australia, making a series for Australian television that was struggling badly. He was on the other side of the world, away from friends, away from family, working on a project that was failing. On the 25th of June, 1968, he ended his own life. He was 44 years old. The note he left behind spoke of things going wrong too many times. He had gone from being the king of British comedy to dying alone and in financial difficulty on the other side of the world in less than a decade. The scale of the fall is almost incomprehensible. Number 1, Terry Thomas. And here we are. Number 1. This is the story we mentioned at the very beginning of this entire video. This is the man whose friends had to hold a benefit concert to pay his bills. And if you are not already familiar with Terry Thomas, because maybe you're younger or from a different part of the world, let me introduce you to one of entertainment's most perfectly crafted personas. Terry Thomas was, in the truest sense of the phrase, a one-of-a-kind entertainer. With his famous gap between his front teeth, his pencil-thin moustache, his impeccably tailored suits, and his outraged, pompous delivery, he created one of the most perfectly crafted comic personas in entertainment history. He played the definitive upper-class British bounder, incompetent, self-important, easily flustered. Absolutely hilarious. But here's the critical thing. He transcended that character. He was not just a British star. He crossed over to Hollywood. He appeared in major American productions. He worked with A-list directors and A-list casts. He lived the life that most performers could only dream of. Beautiful homes, fine clothes, first-class travel, international fame. At his peak, in the late 1950s and throughout the 1960s, Terry Thomas was earning significant sums of money and spending them in a style that matched his on-screen persona perfectly. He lived expansively. He lived well. He had achieved the kind of success that entertainment industry professionals aspire to. And then, decades later, in the 1980s, something happened. A man who had starred in Hollywood films, a man who had been one of the most recognizable British faces on the planet, a man who had lived in the finest homes in Europe, was discovered by journalists living in a damp, unfurnished charity-funded flat in Belgravia, London, no furniture. Damp walls, no financial security, no savings. A man who had once lived in the finest homes in Europe, reduced to this state, living on charity. The story caused genuine shock throughout the British entertainment industry when it became public. It raised questions about what had happened. How had someone at that level fallen so far? In 1989, his friends and former colleagues organized a major benefit concert to raise money for his medical care and living costs. Performers who had worked with him, who had known him, who respected him, came together specifically to help him survive. This wasn't fictional. This actually happened. Benefit concert. For Terry Thomas, he spent his final years in that flat, supported by friends, by charity, by a benefit concert. He died in 1990. 12 lives. 12 brilliant entertainers. Millions of people watched them. Millions admired them. Millions loved them. 12 examples of how fame, no matter how bright it burns, does not guarantee security. The reasons for their falls were different. Gambling, illness, taxes, unfair contracts, different circumstances. But the result was the same: financial devastation, loss of security, struggle in their final years. These aren't stories about carelessness. These aren't morality tales about people who deserved what happened to them. These are stories about an industry that didn't protect its workers. An industry that changed without warning. An era when financial planning wasn't standard. An era when addiction treatment wasn't readily available. An era when contracts were predatory. These are stories that deserve to be remembered. If this video has moved you, if these stories have impacted you, please give it a like. Subscribe to this channel. We tell stories that matter. Stories that the algorithm doesn't always prioritize. Stories about history. Stories about entertainment. Stories about the real lives behind the fame. Share this video with someone who loves entertainment history. Someone who loves the golden age of television. Someone who wants to understand the real costs of fame. Thank you for staying with us until the end.